Hi everyone, my name is Julie. This is Keep Calm with Books and Coffee, and today I am going to be talking about my favorite books of 2022. Of course, this list has been all year in the making, and since I read 150 books last year, I read a lot more than I ever have before, and I really wanted to talk about different categories of books in this video. I am not ranking, and I won't have like a number one favorite book. I have too many favorites for that and too many different categories, but yeah, I wanted to kind of split it up a little bit differently this year and kind of butter knife things into things like my favorite graphic novels, my favorite nonfiction books, my favorite series, and my favorite like standalone or parts of series that I read this year. So the first one I want to mention is the series that I kicked the year off with. In 2022, I started by reading the entire Will Darling series by K.J. Charles, and I absolutely adored it. In this, we are following Will Darling and Kim Secretan. There are two main characters, and they are living in the 1920s England. The two of them meet under a series of circumstances because Will has inherited his uncle's bookshop recently, and he seems to think that he's come across some information that his uncle had in regard to the war effort. Basically, he might have been part of some espionage, but Will doesn't know for sure, and he doesn't know who to give it to. Enter Will Secretan, who is a bit of a slippery eel, and the two of them have to figure out if Will is going to give over this information to Kim, or if Will is going to find another place to get rid of this information, and Will is in some danger because of this. This is a historical male-male romance series, and I loved this so much. I loved how the suspense and romance and plots drug out over all three books, and how we had to kind of keep coming back to confronting these different issues that Will and Kim had. Each one of them had things that kept them from being fully able to like commit to a relationship, and of course it is the 1920s in England, so they have to kind of be covert about their relationship. But this series is so fun, and also it confronts a lot of things that happened in the 1920s and kind of talks about things that happened in the war effort as well as at home, and it's just a great series. I loved this. I love K.J. Charles in general. She writes great historical romances, and I just had a ton of fun of this. It kicked my year off correctly. And then throughout 2022, I read 16 installments of the October Daye series by Shauna McGuire. In this, we are following Toby Daye, who is a private investigator. She's half human, half fae, and she has to investigate different crimes that happen in the fae world. She gets basically thrown at a bunch of different problems because she is a hero of the fairy realms, and that means something in her world. She is also half human and does have that PI license that she knows how to go about an investigation with some degree of criminal know-how and some investigative techniques that the like immortal fae have no idea what she's doing. In this, we follow her across many different investigations as well as her personal life, because she has experienced some really difficult things recently that she has to work through, and she is getting deeper and deeper into fae politics and the world and exploring her family history. I love this series. It was fantastic. The audiobooks are some of my favorite of all time. They are read by Mary Robinette Kowal, and I highly recommend them. But this series was just absolutely fantastic, and finishing it up at the end of December was a treat and also a torture because the next book doesn't come out till next fall. But I am going to be rereading these next year, I'm sure, just to keep picking up on all the little things that I will now know about because I've read the entire series and I know there are hints about all of that dropped along the way. Next up, I want to talk about another small category, and that's my favorite nonfiction from the year. I finally got back into reading nonfiction in 2022. From the time COVID hit through 2021, I was really sparse in my nonfiction reading. I usually try to incorporate like one a quarter, and I wasn't doing that, so I made an effort in the latter half of this year to do that, and I read two really good ones. The first was How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. This is an examination by Smith into the way different locations throughout the United States and around the globe talk about slavery and how they incorporate that into how they either do tours or present themselves to the public, or just even how they operate and what they do to examine that history. He is very vocal about how he, as a Black man, feels going to these different locations, because I think he visits like 16 places across the world and examines their individual history with slavery and how these places are teaching about history. For example, the first one he goes to is Monticello, and he talks about Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers and their relationship to slavery, and what, you know, Monticello is presenting to the public about this. It was a really interesting and valuable read. I highly recommend the audiobook, which is read by Clint Smith. And this was just such a careful and thoughtful examination of these places, and a real confrontation with some of them, and confronting history as well as confronting the modern day and how the modern day looks at history. And I thought it was really, really excellent. I think I gave this a 4.5 stars when I initially rated it, but I have continued to think about this book and think about how excellent it was. And when I was making this list, I thought, I was like, I want to examine if I want to go back and give that 5 stars, and I think I do. I'm trying to get a physical copy of it as well, because I want to like go back and mark it up and highlight things and tab things and also lend it out to friends. I want to also have this on my shelves. So highly recommend this one. It was excellent, and I found it to be a really well done audiobook to help you. At least for me, a nonfiction is easier to absorb on audio. I feel like I take the time to listen to more of it, and I kind of absorb and let it sink in more, because audiobooks slow me down a little bit. So I tend to kind of grasp onto more as I go. The other one I read was The Girls Who Went Away, The Hidden History of Women Who Surrendered Children for Adoption in the Decades Before Roe versus Wade, and this is by Ann Fessler. Ann Fessler herself is an adoptee, and she examines the system that existed in the 50s and 60s, mostly post-World War II, but pre-Roe versus Wade, of young women who got pregnant out of wedlock and the situations they faced, the coercion and promises that they were faced with to give up their child to adoption. And it's a really heavy read. I've said this a couple of different times when I've talked about this book, because I think it's important to know going in how this book is structured, because I didn't know, and it was something that really impacted my reading and my kind of ability to keep reading. Fessler examines the kind of overarching topic that she wants to talk about in the chapters of this book, and we keep moving through those chapters. But then at the end of each chapter, there are personal accounts by mothers who gave up children. They usually go into deep traumas that the mothers experienced, and talks about, you know, these different things that they did to either cope or deal with the trauma of giving up their baby, and then, you know, kind of how they lived their life and what they did in the end, or how they felt years later. And it's very, very personal, and it's very, very raw. It's unscripted, it's unedited. It's just this personal account that was sometimes the most difficult part of this book. So I would usually have to take a break after reading those chapters because they were heavy and difficult. So just going in, know that that exists, and that was a element of this book that surprised me, that I thought was extremely valuable, but was difficult to get through. Then I have 3 graphic novels that I want to talk about. The first is Heartstopper, volumes 1-4 by Alice Oseman. I guess I could have included this in my series recap as well, because I did reread volumes 1-3, and then I read volume 4 for the first time this year. This was inspired by watching the show, and in this we are following Nick and Charlie, who are 2 what would be American high school students. They're teenagers, going to school and meeting for the first time when they return to school. And Nick is a rugby player. He is kind of shy and quiet, and he seems like a popular kid at school. And Charlie, on the other hand, is the only gay guy at the school, and he faces a lot of bullying because of that. And the two of them meet up and slowly become friends, and then some feelings start to develop, and it's a lot about figuring yourself out and dealing with bullies and figuring your friend group out and how to stay friends. It examines a lot of like teenage topics, but it's very, very sweet and wholesome, and I love this. I try to show the art in my series, or in my graphic novels. I try to show you the art, so this is what the art looks like, and it's a really sweet story, and I absolutely love it. There are some pretty heavy trigger warnings in here. I will try to list all the trigger warnings for these books in the description down below for your reference, as I do in my wrap-ups, because this is kind of a wrap-up for the year. So definitely check that out, but this is an excellent series and I love it to bits. Then I have Batman The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and this is a duology, I believe. There is a companion novel as well featuring Catwoman, but in this, where it's mainly a duology about Batman as he examines different murders that are happening on holidays. So a new murder is happening on each holiday, all centered around the crime families of Gotham, and Batman has to examine this, figure it out, and he has to try and stop the next one. Everyone is trying to stop the next murder on the next holiday. And this was such a fascinating read. I really loved this because I felt like it kept me on my toes throughout the series. It just kind of kept me guessing through the whole thing, and I also learned a lot. Like, a bunch of different Batman villains show up, and it's just a really interesting examination of the Batman lore. I really loved it, and this is kind of the art style. It's kind of a traditional graphic novel series, or a traditional comic art style, and I just loved this. I loved volume 1 the most. Volume 2 does exist, and I did read it and I did enjoy it, but I loved volume 1 the most. It was the most twisty, the most turny, and had the most interesting development of character and story in it for me. We also kind of see the evolution of Harvey Dent and how he comes to be and how he turns into Two-Face, and we just see a bunch of different storylines develop in here. Then the last one I wanted to mention is also a Batman comic, and it is Batman Hush by Jeff Loeb, Jim Lee, and Scott Williams, and this is another sort of detective-based Batman story. In this, we're following Batman as a lot of his typical villains, typical enemies show up committing crimes, but they are committing crimes that don't quite seem like the crimes they normally commit. So Batman has to kind of figure out what is happening. Are they working together? Are they working separately? Who is pulling the strings, and where is it all leading? And I really loved this. The art style is a little bit grittier and a little bit more modern. Long Halloween, it kind of steps closer to the modern day, of course, but it was surprising, fascinating, kept me on the edge of my seat, and I really, really loved this. Had a lot of fun with it. Next up, I have all the books that are standalones or standalones for now. I don't think they're gonna be like true series of any kind, but they may have companions down the road. So let's jump into these. This is probably the biggest stack. First up, I have Queen of Coin and Whispers by Helen Corcoran. This is a high fantasy standalone about a queen and her spy master. The queen has just been crowned after her uncle's death, and she has to quickly get on her feet and figure out how she is going to pay for everything, because her uncle has run the coffers of the kingdom dry, and she relies on her new spy master to help her do that, and her spy master has taken the job in order to kind of avenge her father and figure out who killed her father. I loved Leah and Zania, and the two of them are fantastic. This is a sapphic standalone high fantasy romance, centered mostly around politics, but the feelings and the romance is in there too. I absolutely loved this. I think it balances politics and romance really well. Unlike things that kind of swing one way or the other, I think this is pretty balanced and pretty focused on both. I wish there was more to this. I wish there was another book in the series so we could see more going on, but it's still excellent, and I really, really loved this. Next up is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki, and this is a contemporary story following a few different timelines with some magical realism and sci-fi mixed in there. We're following a young trans girl who has run away from home and is a brilliant violin player, as well as a violin teacher who is selling the souls of her students to the devil and hell in order to win back her, complete her deal and win back whatever she needs. And we are also following a alien in a donut shop trying to keep her family safe while just being disguised as humans. And it is quite an interesting story. There's a lot going on in here. This is one that I actually wouldn't recommend the audiobook for because there's one narrator and it's really difficult to tell the different character voices apart when you're listening to it. It was a difficult book both in content and style. Like I mentioned, those 3 different points of view have a lot going on, and I feel like you're drowning for a little bit in the story and the explanations for a while. But I got so attached to these characters and I was really rooting for them, and I needed to know how we were going to get out of the jam that we found ourselves in while through this book, and kind of how we were going to solve all the problems that were happening in here. I just loved it to bits. I highly recommend it. Definitely check the trigger warnings out for this one, but it was just fantastic. I loved it. Then I read The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror novel set in the late 80s, early 90s in the American South, and I think if you want a book that feels like Stranger Things, read this book. That is how I've been describing it to people all year. We're following a young house mom who has 2 kids and a husband, and she is responsible for everything in her house, and she wants a little bit of excitement, so she joins a book club where they talk about true crime books. And then a man enters their community that our main character is very suspicious of, and she is trying to figure out how she can protect her community and herself, and if this man has anything to do with children disappearing in the poor regions of her town. It's fascinating, it's dark, it has a lot of trigger warnings, but it is also just a fast-paced Stranger Things type feel to it. The way that it feels like the story is speeding up throughout this book and racing towards the end till we get there is just so intense and vivid, and I just was able to kind of picture everything that was happening in this book. And I don't read a lot of horror. I'm surprised this was for me, but it really captured me and captured my attention, and I was fascinated by it, and I will definitely be trying more Grady Hendrix. I also want to mention Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. I don't have my copy of this. A friend is borrowing it right now, but this is a cozy fantasy about Val, who is a orc who has worked as a mercenary for years, but she really wants to hang up her axe and start a coffee shop instead. So she does that, and this is her kind of light business struggles, trying to figure out a menu and what to put on the signs, and kind of the community she builds around her as she builds this business as well. It's really sweet. I loved it. It is very low stakes in the way of like the things that happen are everyday stresses, but it's set in a fantasy cozy coffee shop, and it's absolutely fantastic, and I love it. So definitely recommend this one. It's short, it's sweet, and it's sapphic. Next up, we have A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This is the story of Viola, a trans woman who took the opportunity that was presented to her when she was in the war and believed dead, to transition to her, herself, and then come back to England and live under different circumstances. But after the war, she is living with a family member and living her life, piecing her life back together, when news comes of a friend of hers that she was in the war with named Justin, and their families were friends for years. Actually, Justin and Viola were best friends up until she was thought to be dead. So Viola goes back after having transitioned, and Justin doesn't know she's transitioned. He thinks he's meeting someone new, and the two of them have to kind of reconnect, and Viola wants to help him without telling him who she is. And the two of them have to figure that out, but then things start to take a turn towards romance. I loved this to pieces. I think Alexis Hall does an excellent job of writing this with care and care and concern for his trans main character and trans readers. It's a very sweet story. It's very loving, and you can tell it's built around Viola's safety and making her as happy as possible. I loved this so much. It's such a wonderful romance, and I couldn't put it down. I read this in like a day, and it's like almost 500 pages. I think it's over 450. It's just at 450. I read this so fast because it was fast-paced and fun, as well as all those other things that I mentioned already. So definitely a great historical queer romance. Then I have two holiday romance centered recommendations. The first is like fall Halloween recommendation. The first is Wishful Thinking by Celestine Martin. This is what would happen if you mixed Halloween Town with practical magic and set it on the East Coast and had like an element of the movie Big with Tom Hanks in it. Regarding the fortune teller, we're following Lucy, who is a young witch. She has been out of school for a few years, and she gets an email about an upcoming reunion for her class. I think it's her 10-year high school reunion, and she's very concerned that she has done nothing but teach high school since she's not married, she doesn't have kids, she doesn't feel like her career has been very, noteworthy, and she writes out a list of things like her dream situation and accidentally sends this off into the world to be published as what she has been up to for the past 10 years. So she is dealing with this when her high school best friend and potential romantic interest in high school comes back to town after his parents gift him a house across the street from Lucy's. And the two of them are thrown back together again to examine feelings that they had 10 years ago when Alex left and Lucy let him leave without saying anything. So it's hot, it's steamy, it's fun, it's a cute, really sweet, fast-paced, fun story romance. The steam levels are nice, and I just really enjoyed this one. It felt perfect to read at the beginning of October with all the like light magical touches, and it's just so fun. Loved it to bits. Then my other holiday themed romance recommendation is The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Leese, and this blew me out of the water in December. It was my favorite read of December. I love this so much. I want you to read this like now. In this, we are following our two main characters who are enemies in the bookshop that they work at because the bookshop is not doing well financially, so they may have to lose one of these two characters at the end of the year. If they don't sell enough and the financial situation is still unchanged, then one of the two of them gets to keep their job. It's Gabriella and Jonathan, and Gabriella is convinced that Jonathan hates the holidays, he hates her, he hates everything she stands for, and she has decided to create a competition with Jonathan that the two of them have to, whoever outsells the other one is the one that gets to stay at the bookstore. And it's the kind of thawing out of that enemies to lovers as the two of them start to get to know one another over this holiday season and examine why they are enemies, in fact. So it's really sweet. It's a novella. It's like just over 150 pages, I think. Yeah, like 175. I couldn't put this down. I read it so fast. I reread it like a couple of days later because I just couldn't not, and I loved it to pieces. I say that a lot in this video. I loved this book so much, and I was throwing it at everyone over the holidays, just telling them to read it, because there's so many little tropes in here that made it perfect for me. There's the enemies to lovers, grumpy sunshine, there's a you've got mail element in here, and there's lots and lots of different cute tropes. And one of the things I loved the most about this was that the miscommunication trope is sort of subverted in this, and even though it appears, it's kind of resolved really quickly, and in a way it's just kind of totally subverted and made into something much more to my taste. So highly recommend. 5 out of 5 stars. will sing the praises of this book next year too. Then the last few things I have to talk about today are all part of a series, either the beginning of a series that I know is continuing or an installment in a series. So the first one I have here is Sweep of the Blade by Ilona Andrews, and Ilona Andrews is one of my favorite authors. I will recommend you pretty much anything they have written. I love them to bits and they do great world building. In this, we're following an inn on Earth that serves as a waypoint for intergalactic travel. So aliens of all types come to inns, and inns are a very well-guarded secret on Earth so that aliens of all shapes and sizes can come and rest and then move on. And our main character of the series, Diane, is a innkeeper, and she has special powers to help her protect the inn and protect the inn's secrets. In this particular novel, we're following her sister Maud as Maud goes off Earth to another planet to kind of pursue a romance of sorts and see what she wants to do. She's trying to pick up the pieces of her life after losing her husband, and she's just trying to rebuild her life with her young daughter, and also seeing if she wants to pursue this romance. And this book was, I love our main character Diane, but I also loved Maud, and I loved this book so much. I love how it expanded our world. I love how it showed us a totally different aspect of this story. The other volumes in this series are a bit like sci-fi fantasy on Earth, but this was like full sci-fi on a planet with a different species, and seeing Maud adapt and play politics, and it was just so fun. I loved her so much, and she was so smart about everything that I just loved this to pieces and can't wait to read more of her. I also have Witchmark by C.L. Polk. In this, we are following Miles, who is a soldier he's a doctor who, as a soldier, faked his own death in order to escape the family that he grew up with. His family wanted him to go down a certain path with his magic, and he wanted to be able to work with soldiers and heal them, so he fakes his own death and tries to go down a different path. Unfortunately, the path that he's on, he can't use a lot of his magic to help heal people, and he is trying to figure out why the soldiers coming back from the front have these really severe symptoms and are slowly what seems to be like unraveling mentally. Like they seem to be losing the ability to not hurt people. Like there have been a series of murders where soldiers attack their families and themselves. So it's a pretty heavy topic, but Miles is trying to figure out why this happens. But through a series of events, he gets delved way deeper into this world, way deeper into the politics and the kind of problems going on here, and he has to examine it. Person that may or may not be trustworthy. It's fun, it's fantasy, it's queer, it's fantastic. I can't wait to continue this series. It's a trilogy, and it's set in one of my like favorite times of like Edwardian England. It has that vibe to it, so very, very fun. Then if I was any more decisive, I think I would name this book my favorite book of the year, but I'm not that decisive. This is Iron Widow by Jiren J. Zhao, and in this we are following futuristic set story of the first female Chinese emperor, and we're talking about her kind of story set in this futuristic space setting with giant mechs that are used to combat enemy forces. So the army uses men and women to fuel these mechs, but the women almost always die through the process of piloting these mechs, and Zetienne has lost her sister, and so she volunteers in order to attempt to kill the man who killed her sister. And so she takes this on and she succeeds, but she succeeds in a way that she wasn't planning on, and she survives the murder of this man and then becomes the Iron Widow. She is the embodiment of female rage. She is angry, she is out for blood, she is ready to take down and tear down this system with her bare hands, and it is so cathartic. It is so cathartic to read, and it was fantastic. I loved every second of this book. It's also polyam. It's also a just fantastic world and setting, and the world building is so interesting and complex and intricate, and I just loved the arc of this. I'm so excited for the second book to come out next year. I will be pre-ordering it and reading it as soon as it comes out. Then I have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is the first in the Burning Kingdoms series. In this, we are following Princess Malini, who has been sent into exile by her brother, and she is trying to find a way to overthrow her brother in order to protect her people and herself. And we are also following Priya, who is a maidservant, and she was part of a group of temple dedicants who kind of guarded and also wielded the magic of this area that has been colonized by Milani's brother and ancestors. And the two of them are each trying to contemplate what it would mean to form a rebellion and take back or give back this area that Priya is native to. And this was so fantastic. I loved this. I loved the dark forest and how the forest was literally infecting people and turning them into wood, and this sort of strange disease that we're seeing overtake people, and the forest being that dark, sinister place, as well as the magic in here is so interesting. I loved the examination of Priya and Milani's stories, and I loved our characters, I loved the writing, I loved the world building. The pacing was the only thing that was off a little bit for me in this book, in that it took a long time for me to understand the world, but I think sticking with it was worth it because it was so fascinating to see this story come together and everything lock into place at the end. So I'm excited to continue on with the next book in this series. Then the last one I have here is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. I have finally continued on with the Wayfarer series this year. And in this, we are following Lovelace and Pepper. Lovelace is a AI who was housed in a ship. She is used to being in a ship and being part of a ship and having lots of different things to monitor and watch and having cameras everywhere, but her ship was badly damaged and she has to be in a body now, like a human synthetic body. And she's trying to adjust to this, and Pepper has taken her in order to try and help her through this transition. And we follow the story of Lovelace in what is like their current day, and we're also looking back at Pepper's childhood and the things that she endured in order to survive the situation she was in. It's a pretty heavy story. It's Becky Chambers, so it's like a hope punk sci-fi story of examining these things but also feeling hopeful about the outcome. And I just loved this. It really got me in my emotions. I love Becky Chambers' characters and stories. I love how they're like slow character driven stories where we examine the things that brought us to this point and how we're going to keep going through them. And I just loved this so much. But those are all the books that I am going to be talking about today. I have two other books that are Harper Collins titles that I won't mention because of the strike going on with Harper Collins right now. I will include those in my Harper Collins wrap-up video that I will do once the strike is over. So that's everything that I want to talk about and mention today. But if you have any thoughts or feelings and want to share them down below, I'd love to hear about them. If you want to just leave me a book emoji to let me know you were here, that's also great. Because I talked about a lot of books today. I'm gonna need some water because I'm running out of voice. If you want to see me again, go ahead and hit that subscription button, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!